All right, today we're diving into a medical mystery. It's one where the biggest clue, high blood pressure, is actually a huge red herring. It's pointing to something way deeper, so let's get into it. So, picture this. You've got high blood pressure, but nothing seems to work. What if the problem isn't your heart at all? What if it's just a symptom, a response to a faulty signal coming from somewhere else in your body? That's exactly what we're going to unpack.
Okay, so before we can figure out what's going wrong, we've got to understand how our bodies get it right. Let's take a look at the pretty amazing system that's in charge of managing your blood pressure day in and day out. All right, meet the main character in our story, aldosterone. Think of it as your body's personal fluid balance manager. It's a hormone made by your adrenal glands, and its big job is telling your kidneys, hey, hold on to that salt and water. When you keep more fluid, your blood volume goes up, and so does your blood pressure. It's a super important tool for keeping everything in balance. But here's the thing, aldosterone doesn't just go rogue. Nope. It's part of this really intricate chain of command called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Yeah, it's a mouthful, so we'll just call it RAAS. Let's break down how this whole chain reaction actually works. So this is a beautiful biological process when it's working right. It all starts when your kidneys sense that blood flow is a little low. That's their cue to release an enzyme called renin. Renin then kicks off this whole cascade that ends up creating a super powerful substance called angiotensin II. Now, this guy constricts your blood vessels and, this is the key part, it tells your adrenal glands to release aldosterone. And just like we said, aldosterone tells your body to hang on to salt and water, which brings your blood volume and your blood pressure right back up to where it should be. It's a totally healthy, life-saving process. Now, the RAS system is meant to be a temporary fix, right? But what happens when that low blood flow signal just never shuts off? Well, that's when this life-saving system can actually start to work against you. This is where we get to secondary aldosteronism. And what's wild is that the adrenal glands and the ROS, they're actually doing their jobs perfectly. They're responding correctly to the signal they're getting. The problem is the signal itself. It's like a faulty fire alarm that's just stuck on, constantly screaming that blood pressure is low when it's really not. And it is so important to separate this from a similar condition. You see, in primary aldosteronism, the problem is actually in the adrenal gland. It's just pumping out aldosterone for no good reason. The body sees this and tries to shut the whole system down, so your renin levels are low. But in secondary aldosteronism, the problem is somewhere else entirely, and it's triggering the whole system to fire up. That's why both renin and aldosterone are high. That high renin, that's our smoking gun. Okay, so if the problem is a faulty alarm, the next obvious question is, what's pulling the alarm? Why on earth would the kidneys think blood flow is down when it isn't? Well, the investigation usually points to a few main suspects. First, you could have a literal physical blockage, like a narrowing of the artery that feeds the kidney. That's called renal artery stenosis. Or, and this is kind of ironic, really severe high blood pressure itself can make the tiny blood vessels inside the kidney clamp down. And a third big cause are conditions that make your body retain a lot of fluid, like heart failure or cirrhosis. In those cases, even though you have plenty of fluid, the effective blood flow to the kidneys is low. So in all these situations, the kidneys basically panic and sound the alarm. Now, you'd think a condition this complex would have all sorts of obvious symptoms, right? And yeah, some people might get things like weakness or tingling because their potassium levels get low. But honestly, a lot of the time, the only thing anyone notices is just stubborn, high blood pressure that won't budge with the usual treatments. So we've got a real medical mystery on our hands. High blood pressure that's just a symptom of some hidden trigger. Now let's talk about how doctors actually crack the case and figure out the right way to treat it. And this is really the key question for any doctor who's dealing with hypertension that just isn't responding to treatment. How do you confirm you're not just looking at a symptom, but a symptom of something else entirely? The definitive clue, it turns out, is in the blood work. By measuring both aldosterone and renin levels, doctors can see the whole story. If aldosterone is high but renin is low, that points right to a problem with the adrenal gland itself. That's primary aldosteronism. But if both aldosterone and renin are high, that's a huge flashing sign that the entire ROS system is in overdrive, and that sends doctors looking for that secondary cause. So once you have that diagnosis, the treatment strategy becomes crystal clear. You don't just treat the high blood pressure. I mean, that's like turning off a fire alarm while the building is still on fire.
No, the real goal here is to find the source of the smoke and put out the actual fire. This means treatment is usually a two-pronged attack. The absolute top priority is to fix the underlying problem if you can, like a surgeon going in to open up that narrowed kidney artery. But at the same time, you can manage the symptoms by directly blocking what all that extra aldosterone is doing. Medications called aldosterone antagonists, like spironolactone, are perfect for this. And for men who might run into certain side effects, there's another more specific drug called eplerenone that works really well. So as we wrap this up, the big takeaway is pretty powerful. Secondary aldosteronism is just a perfect example of why in medicine, and maybe in life in general, it's so critical to look past the obvious symptom to find and solve the real problem underneath. Getting this right can completely change everything for a patient. And that leaves us with a pretty interesting thought, doesn't it? If something as common as high blood pressure can be a signpost for such a complex issue, what other everyday symptoms could be telling us a much deeper story? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.